Hi, it's Marcy, and welcome to Geode Yoga Plus Fitness. Today, I have with me Matt Odie, who is from Cleveland, Ohio, who has such an inspirational life story that we wanted to share it with all of you. So, Matt, rather, I'm stopping
Hey,
because
that's my
you don't
dad's
like it.
name, so it's all
Yeah,
good. You know
yeah.
what? I probably get called Mike. The funniest part is I probably get called Mike half the time anyway, so it's all
And I
good.
kept
Thanks.
searching for Mike all day. I'm like, no wonder I can't find him. It's Matt.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well,
Okay,
first,
well,
thanks for having me on, Marcy. I actually really
sure.
appreciate it, and super excited to share my story and hopefully give some value to your audience, especially during these times. There's so much uncertainty and so much anxiety and stress in the air, and that's what I just want to do is share my story of like, yeah, I did go through a lot of adversity, but I came out as a stronger person, as a stronger individual, and I really think that a lot of people right now who are going through this are going to be able to do the exact same thing. I'm going to help you be able to do that by sharing my story and my messages along the way. So
Wonderful. I know
really
my
excited.
audience is ready to, I know I'm inspired by
Awesome.
it, so I know
Oh, well,
others will be
thank
too.
you. Cool. All right. So I'm going to give you a little background before I start. So I'm 28 years old. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And, to start off my story, we're going to go back about 4 years. We're going to go back to a very important date. It's March 17th of 2016. I was 24 years old at the time. I was a personal trainer, really, really fit, working out all the time and, just extremely healthy. It's actually St. Patrick's Day and I'm out at the bars with one of my friends and we're just having a good time, doing, having some fun. And all of a sudden I run into this girl and her name's Lauren. So we get to talking, I eventually get her number and, after that we just keep talking and talking and eventually we start dating. So about a month and a half later, we start dating. It's close to summertime. We're doing all these summer activities, from hiking to going kayaking to just doing the things that a normal boyfriend and girlfriend would do. So all of a sudden, I started to notice these minor back pains. And, like I said before, as a personal trainer, I just thought it could be from lifting, it could be from working out too much. So I just let it
Right.
go. Well, as the months progress, so about a month or two progresses, I get to a point where it's hard for me to even stand or walk. But yet at 24 years old, you feel like you're invincible. As a young adult, you're like, I can fight through this. I'll be fine. I went to like a chiropractor and they're like, yeah, we'll just do some alignment. You'll be fine. Until one day, it was August, I believe, 10th, and I was over at Lauren's house. And, we had just spent the night together. And all of a sudden, I woke up and I started puking up blood that night. And all of a sudden, I was like, okay, I know something's wrong here. Something can't be right. So, the next day I end up going to the hospital. They do a blood test on me and they find out that I had lost 2/3 of the blood that was circulating in my body, which is equivalent to being shot with a gun, actually. So I
Wow.
ended up getting 6 bags of blood to get my energy and basically all my levels back up. And they thought it was an ulcer that was causing the bleeding. So they end up going in and doing a surgery that day to remove what they thought was an ulcer. And I just remember sitting in the recovery room when I was done. I was eating cereal, thinking it's all over. And all of a sudden, the doctor walks in and he has this blank stare in his eyes. And right then, I knew something was like dead wrong. So he goes over to my parents and he talks to them and he says, "Can I speak to you two in private?" And immediately I stopped him and I said, "No, whatever you want to tell them, you can tell me." So he sat down, he grabbed my hand, he looked at me and he said, "Matt, we have found an 11-centimeter tumor in your small intestine. We believe it is cancer and we have to rush you to the main campus of the Cleveland Clinic immediately." So right then and there, I just remember looking at my parents who were crying at the time. And so much uncertainty in my life, not knowing if Lauren would maybe stick with me because she'd only been dating me at this time for maybe 2 to 2.5 months before I was diagnosed with cancer. And I had to realize, how am I going to be strong for all of them? How am I going to be strong for my friends and everything? How am I going to get through this? I think this is a good lesson in life. We all are going to have some unexpected news, some unexpected uncertainties in our life. But if you can look at life two different ways, you can say, why is this happening to me? Or how is this happening for me? I'm going to say it one more time. You can look at it as, why is this happening to me? Or how is this happening for me? If you look at it as, why is this happening to me? You start making excuses. You start asking, why me? But if you're saying, how is this happening for me? then you can look at it as a lesson. You can look at it as something that's going to help push you forward and something you can learn from. And that's what I decided to do, is say, how is this happening for me? So immediately I get rushed to the main campus of the Cleveland Clinic, and they end up doing probably like 50 different tests on me. They end up finding out that I have stage 3C testicular cancer, which is the highest form of testicular cancer that you can pretty much have. And immediately I was put right onto intense chemotherapy, where they put me on 3 different chemo cocktails. They were called cisplatin, etoposide, and bleomycin. Now these just absolutely destroyed your body, your good cells and your bad cells. So within a week, I'd already lost my hair. I was already extremely fatigued. I couldn't get out of the bed. All of the, if somebody, who's watching knows somebody who's gone through cancer, or have you been through cancer, the effects that chemo has on you. And to make matters worse, in the middle of my chemotherapy, I ended up losing my 4-year-old puppy, who was diagnosed with cancer about 6 months before I was. And I ended up taking him to all of his chemotherapy sessions. Every single one of them I would take him to. And when we were fighting together, it was like he was my rock and I felt like I was his. And when he passed away, it was one of the most draining mentally challenges I've ever faced. I started to go to the why is this happening phase, the excuses. I started to blame other people and blame, for me, I believe in God and I have faith, but I'm not pushing faith on anybody. But for me, I would blame God and blame all these, things that are happening for probably a week straight. I wouldn't want to go to chemotherapy. I wouldn't want to get up and walk the days I should and eat the right foods. And then all of a sudden, one day I'm laying in bed and I get up and I asked myself, I said, is this what Duke, my puppy who just passed away, would want me to do? Is this what my family, is this what Lauren, who decided to stick with me, by the way, throughout chemotherapy? And this is a vital part. She's been my rock throughout this whole thing. And, is this what Lauren wants? Is this what my friends would want from me? And I said, absolutely not. So I got my butt up off of the, sorry, I don't want to swear if it's not a swearing podcast, sorry. But I got my butt up off.
I don't.
Okay. Well, I got my ass up off of the bed to make things more dramatic. I really did. And I started walking a little bit. I started to eat the right foods. And, within another month and a half, I was finally done with chemotherapy. And, there's a lot of struggles in between. But a really cool story is when I finished my chemotherapy, my dad said, you know what, we're going to host an event to kind of celebrate your end of chemotherapy. And I said, awesome, that's really cool. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 people come celebrate. We have no idea. It was Thanksgiving morning, and Cleveland, Ohio hosts what's called a turkey trot. It's basically a 5 and 10K race, big race, like thousands of people come to it. So we're just going to have people come to it and they can run the race that they want after. So we host this event, and we had over 400 people show up in support of me. They also, and we ended up calling the race Mustaches for Matt. And here's why. So when I was going through chemotherapy, the first week, I ended up losing all my hair. But I had this dirty mustache that I had that I said, you know what? I'm gonna hold on to whatever hair I have left.
You sported it. Good for you.
Exactly. So you know what, though? The cool part was all my friends, guy friends at least, they said, we're going to grow mustaches throughout this journey with you as well. So all the dads, all of my friends, the whole chemotherapy, they end up doing it. So we end up calling the event Mustaches for Matt. And we end up giving them t-shirts. Girls wore fake mustaches that day. And Hermes, who is actually the big race organization, they noticed us because we had so many of the t-shirts on. They contacted me and, they just gave me like a really good, kind of just positive note to say, hey, we're thinking about you, all this. So that was really cool. And, here's just a little message for all of you that you might be going through something difficult right now. Just realize that you have a support system that you might not even realize. There are so many people out there that really do care for you. And if you're going through something difficult, don't be afraid to share it with some people, especially somebody that you're close with, because they want to help you. And I was so amazing because I probably didn't even know half the people that showed up that day that said, Matt, we've been praying for you. Matt, that we just wanted to show up to give our thoughts and prayers and all of these things for you. And I was just like absolutely amazed by it. Yeah. So I just want to let people know that you have so much support with you in life and you're not fighting these battles alone. Because if you try to fight these battles alone, it's
Mm,
going to be a lonely and very difficult journey.
yeah.
So that was the first part of my journey. Now comes the really complicated stuff and where the actual, like, in my opinion, journey begins. After all of this happened, I ended up going to my oncologist, and he sat down with me and he said, Matt, we have some good news and we have some bad news. Your 11 centimeter tumor has shrunk from 11 centimeters to 3 centimeters, which that's the great news. I said, awesome, cool. He said, the bad news is your tumor is wrapped around what's called your inferior vena cava. Now, your inferior vena cava is a central vein that goes from the bottom of your upper body to your heart. It's like a main vein. They said, we're going to have to
Mm,
do a 12-hour surgery to most likely remove that vein. We're going to have to get 4 different surgeons involved, and we have no idea what the complications are going to entail. So right then there, for the next 2.5 weeks before surgery, I was not talking to anybody. I was by
it's a long wait.
myself. And it was a long 2.5 weeks just wanting to get this over with. So eventually the day comes, I get to the surgery room, and they end up doing the 10 to 12 hour surgery on me. And going into the surgery, I was about 140 pounds. Now, before all this, I was about 185 pounds. So it was a 185-pound personal trainer. I lost about 40 to 45 pounds. Well, coming out of this surgery, they ended up removing my vena cava. I had massive swelling in my stomach, and I was close to 200 pounds. I remember
Wow.
waking up like 2 to 3 days after the surgery, and because they kept me sedated, and I couldn't get up off the bed. I couldn't really move. And I remember asking the doctor, I said, is this normal? He said, no, this isn't normal, but the draining should eventually stop, or at least flood out of the stomach. They gave me like a draining tube. They said it eventually should drain out. And I said, okay. Well, eventually as the days went on, I was able to walk a little further and get out of the hospital. Well, about 5 to 6 days out of the hospital, so about 2 weeks after the surgery, all of a sudden the draining just stopped like that. I was in
Mm,
so much pain within like 2 to 3 hours that I got rushed back to the emergency room, where they ended up having to drain 7 liters of fluid out of my stomach, causing
mm.
me to go into complete kidney and liver failure. I had a cone drilled inside of my head to relieve brain swelling. I had a catheter in my neck and in my chest because I thought I was going to be on dialysis the rest of my life. I had a breathing tube in my mouth because I couldn't breathe on my own. And I ended up being in a coma for 2 weeks, not
Oh,
induced.
mm,
So for me, I just want to kind of share a testimony of faith and, something really powerful that happened throughout those 2 weeks. And while I was in that coma, we had 3 major prayer services where hundreds of people would go
mm.
to church and just pray for me. Well, in the middle of that third prayer service, the last prayer service, that was the day that I woke up. And for me, it was almost like God saying, Matt, this isn't the end of your journey. This is only the beginning. Now, it wasn't like I could just wake up, walk out the door, and be fine. No, my way of waking up was opening my eyes and wiggling my fingers. And I'm going to share a story that honestly, I've only shared once before. So I just feel like I should definitely share it
Yeah,
with your audience.
please,
And
please.
so my parents and Lauren were in that hospital for 2 straight weeks. They didn't leave the hospital. They stayed there with me. And every day, Lauren would just hold my hand and just, she'd pray for me and just say, you're going to be healed and all of these things. And during that prayer service, when she was holding my hand, she felt like a wiggle in my fingers. And, for 2 weeks, doctors were like, we don't know when Matt's going to wake up, all of these things. My parents didn't know, and nobody did. Lauren's like, I think Matt just wiggled his fingers. And my parents are like, no way. There's no way he did. No, I really do think so. And then she kept saying, Matt, wake up. Matt, wake up. And I would just keep wiggling my fingers, I guess. And that was how I woke up from my coma. And it was
Amazing.
basically in Lauren's hands. And so, as the week progressed, I started to kind of come to senses. I still had a breathing tube in my mouth, all of these things. I couldn't get out of the bed or anything, but I could kind of consciously know where I was. Well, eventually they took the breathing tube out of my mouth. I could talk, but my mind wasn't quite there because I'd been so much trauma. So I was fixated on things. It was really weird, but I was fixated on little things and I couldn't hold conversations, but I was making progress. So they said, you know what, Matt, we're going to try and take out one of the catheters in your neck because you're starting to see some good levels in, in kidney and liver function. So they go to take out one of the catheters in my neck, and I end up having an irrhythm heartbeat, and I end up going into cardiac arrest.
Oh my
They end up having to do 8 minutes of CPR on me, and I end up going back into another 1-week coma where they had to seduce me. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah. And at this point, I'm in the ICU room now for 3 to 4 weeks at this point. I think it's almost 4 weeks now. So I wake up and it's Valentine's Day, and I see flowers and hearts everywhere. And, the first person I see is my parents and Lauren. And, at this point, I realized that my mind started kind of coming to me like, okay, I have a journey ahead of me, and I have to relearn to live my entire life over again now.
Yeah.
And from laying in my bed to sitting from sitting up, just from laying to sitting up took almost a week. From sitting to standing took almost a week. From standing to taking my very first steps again, this whole process took probably close to 3 weeks of constant nurses and doctors helping me to do this. It wasn't like I could sit up on my own. They would help me do this. And it was a slow process. And at this point, I'd already had 4 surgeries on my stomach where I had stitches from my left hip to my right hip. And every time now that I started to walk, and I'm still in the ICU room at this point, something just felt totally off. It just didn't feel right. And I remember telling them again, I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. But they're like, you're doing great. Just keep pushing forward. And every time I take a step, I get super dizzy. But eventually I just kept making progress. And within about a month and a half, I was out of the ICU room. Well, 4 days into, I was out of the ICU room, but I was into like a recovery room into the Cleveland Clinic. So 4 days into that recovery room, I'm still making some progress. They said, you know what, Matt, we're going to take you to your final stages of physical therapy. You're doing great. You're doing such a good job, but something still just didn't feel right. Well, as they're wheeling me off, like in my bed, to go to a physical therapy room, I remember looking down at my stitches, and my stitches had popped open and my spleen was sticking out of my stomach. And they had to rush me into a 5th major surgery.
Oh my gosh.
I had a 5th major surgery in less than 2 months. And I'm sure you can guess where I ended up back in the ICU room. Yeah. So
how long that time?
So for the ICU room,
yeah,
I'll kind of share with you. This is kind of my breaking point here.
It's hard for me not to interrupt and ask you so many questions, but go ahead.
Hey, absolutely. And I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah. So this was kind of my breaking point here. I ended up going back into the ICU room. I remember waking up from my surgery. This was another long surgery where they ended up having to do what's called an open wound surgery on me. So the open wound surgery was where they couldn't stitch me back up because they had done so many surgeries on my stomach that they had to leave what's called an open wound. They had to put a big mesh on my stomach, and they had to take out all of my abdominals. So I don't have any abdominals. So they had to put a mesh there to hold everything together. So I ended up waking up in the ICU room. And I remember waking up, I had a breathing tube in my mouth. My hands and my legs were strapped to the bed because I guess I was moving around too much. So they had to strap me. And at this point, I was conscious because coming out of that coma, I was not very conscious, but I gained my conscious back and I started to realize things and I started to know where I was. Well, at this point, I knew exactly where I was, but I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't ask for a nurse to do anything. All I could do was sit there and pray and think. And I remember staring at that ceiling and saying, God, I'm officially at rock bottom in my life. I really am. And I have 2 options here. I can give up on my life right now, or I can say I'm in the lowest part of my life and the only place I can go is up. And there's a little lesson. If you feel like you're in rock bottom right now, if you feel like you're in that place, I promise you can get out of it, but you need to change your mindset.
Yeah.
Don't give up on yourself. That's the last thing you need to start doing. Start figuring out little ways of how you're going to do this. I couldn't do anything at that time. And eventually a nurse came in. She noticed I was awake. She took out the breathing tube. She unwrapped my hands. And, about 3 to 4 days in that ICU room, once again, like I said, back in chemotherapy, I got my ass up off that bed and I walked further than I had ever done previous to the ICU room, previous to the recovery room. And I seriously think whatever that surgery did for me, I needed it. Within like 4 or 5 days in the ICU room, I was out of there, back into that recovery room. 4 days in, out of that recovery room, and now finally into my last stages of physical therapy. This is why I had to learn to do all these daily activities again, like sitting on a toilet, getting out of a bed, things that we take for granted every day.
So much we take for granted. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it is. And when you
and
go
even
through
right
these
now,
things,
yeah.
exactly. No, yeah. But like when you go through these things, like you realize like how grateful you truly are. Gratitude is a real thing. Perspective is a real thing. I promise you that. It really is. Yeah. And so I was, for about 2 weeks, I was just grinding, getting myself back together, getting my life back together. And finally, I was released from the hospital after 53 days straight in the hospital. I was finally released. And the day that I was released was March 17th of 2017, the day that I met Lauren, exactly a year ago.
Oh,
that's why I started my
not a
story with that.
coincidence. No,
not at all. She stayed with me. I want to say this real quick. She stayed with me all 53 days in that hospital. She would wake up in the morning, get up at 6 o'clock, come see me. I couldn't talk for probably 40 out of the 53 days. Come just sit there, be present, go to work, come back, sit there with me again, go to sleep, and do this for 53 days. No going out with friends, nothing. She just stayed there. Same with my parents, did the exact same thing. And then I have friends and amazing family and friends coming in and visit me as well. But that's just a testament of, somebody being brought into your life for a reason.
Yeah.
There are people in your life for a reason.
She's a healer, apparently. Yeah. What does she do for a living? Does she mind if we bring her into that?
Of course. Yeah. So it's kind of funny because she actually works in kind of what you would call real estate. She does what's called eminent domain. So it has nothing to do with like nurses or anything like that. But she's like the kindest, sweetest person I know.
And I wonder
like,
what she's doing at this moment now, because it sounds like she's a healer. So it sounds to me she needs to get into some type of energy healing as a sidekick. Yeah. I mean, she could potentially be helping other people where, that's a special soul. That takes a special personality. A lot of people would give up.
She was the total opposite.
Yeah. Are we at the point where I can ask you some questions? Some really deep
if you want to ask me questions, 100%, and I can finish my story as we go along. Ask me as many questions you want right now. This is your podcast. This is all you.
This last surgery that you had, where you were not in a coma and you felt everything. So are you saying that there was a transformation in your mindset from the time you were in a coma to this last experience that you had where you were totally alert and you felt everything and all you could do in that moment was turn inward? Was that a pivotal point, you feel?
I think that was one. I've had like 3 pivotal points in my life, and that was one of them. So that when I was sitting, because I was conscious at that time, I think the coma, coming out of it, my brain and my body was not with it. It was coming out and it was all in just survival mode. How do I survive this? And now when I got out of that ICU room, I was still in survival mode, but I was conscious and aware of what was going on. And I knew I needed to make a shift in my life, not just physically, but mentally. Yeah.
So you were tapping into a part of the brain where you could be open to that then, whereas maybe in the coma state, I don't know what part of the brain is active. I don't know enough about a comatose state. So getting to the comatose state, a lot of people want to know, can you hear people, but you can't respond? Did you have those experiences?
I like it. I love that question. Not too many people ask me this. What's it like being in a coma? So my best advice is, for me personally, somebody else has been in it, share your story. I love it. But mine was like a long dream that never ended. But I did have like my family and Lauren, but I also had some nurses in there too that I think subconsciously that were there at the clinic that I just didn't know about. So I may have came out of my coma, came back in, and they would be part of my dream. And at the very end of my dream, I'm not like, this is not just like a makeup. I promise this is a
No,
real
no.
story. At the end of my
Tell
dream, this
us.
is all I can remember is I'm in this room with all my friends, all my family, parents, everybody. And they're just saying, Matt, it's time to wake up. Matt, it's time to
Mm,
wake up. And
mm.
that's when I kind of woke up. And that's when I guess I was just like, that's the
I've been
last thing I
hearing that
remember of
all
my dream.
along. Yeah. And I don't know what the clinical, what studies are as far as that, or what proof there is that people can actually hear what's going on around them. But I would like to think that, yeah, I mean, there's so many cognitive things that go on. Who knows? Who knows?
There is. It's a spiritual journey, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Very. And it doesn't mean it has to be faith journey. It's just spiritual is like changing
Oh,
your entire identity. It's an
yeah.
identity changing.
I'm getting ready to do a power flow today that I'm recording that has everything to do with how can you recreate yourself in this time, and what ember do you have burning inside that could turn into a flame, and you just haven't allowed the flame, and sitting in the
Hmm.
shit,
That's it.
basically. I mean, here we are sitting in it, and it's going to deep root things up that have been sitting there forever that just needs to find an emergence. So continue with your story because it's so profound, and
Yeah,
then I have a few
absolutely.
more questions for you, but go ahead.
Oh gosh, yeah. Ask as many as you need. I love the questions. So yeah, so continuing with my story, like I said, um, I was kind of giving advice of like, people are meant to be in your life for a reason. I just got out of the hospital, and it was not a coincidence in my opinion that I got released the same day that exactly a year
No.
ago that me and Lauren met each other. So just let you know that if you have that one person in your life, latch onto them, because guess what, like when you're going through a difficult time, I already said this before, you can't fight these journeys alone, but you need to have somebody there that is going to fight with you throughout this journey. And there is somebody there. I promise. You might not think it at the time, but I know for a
Mm,
fact there's somebody out there that is there for you. So when I got released from the hospital, it sounded like it was rainbows and butterflies. Remember how I told you I was 200 pounds
mm,
from all that swelling? I'm now
mm-hmm,
110 pounds. I'm 110 pounds out of this hospital because throughout the hospital, only food and drink I could have was through IV. It was one of the
mm,
most like terrible feelings in the world, having no water in your mouth. The only thing they could do is swab it for probably until the last like week and a half to 2 weeks. I just got swabs with a sponge to like kind of
oh,
get the moisture
right,
in my mouth. That's it.
right.
So I ended up losing close to 90 pounds in 53 days. And coming out of the hospital was a real mental challenge again. I started to get those excuses because I didn't have the nurses and the doctors to hold me accountable. Every day I had a nurse coming in, I had a doctor coming in saying, Matt, okay, time to do your physical therapy, time to do this. I'm on my own now. I mean, I have my parents, I have Lauren, I have like an at-home nurse that would come in like
Mm,
maybe 2 times a week to change what's called
mm,
my wound back. So all
yeah.
she would do is she'd come in and she'd have to change like the mesh that was holding my stomach together and I'll get to that in a second.
Mm-hmm,
But I started to fall in those excuses again. I started to blame other people, and I started to stop doing the stuff that was getting me out of the hospital.
mm-hmm,
So guess what?
mm-hmm.
2 weeks in, I'm back in the hospital. I'm back in the hospital with 150 standing heart rate, just sitting or resting heart rate. So 150 beats per minute, and I have a temperature of 103 degrees. And
Oh,
I'm in there
geez.
for an entire week. And eventually I get out of this hospital, and my heart rate's back down to a reasonable level, and my temperature's back down normal. And I remember sitting with Lauren, and we had this massively deep discussion. And we basically said, this is it. If I don't start making a change in my life, I am going to die. Like, just because I'm out of the hospital does not mean anything, because I
Mm,
am still extremely weak, still tired. And this was that second shift in my life. The next day, the very next day, I I literally went into my basement. Well, I was in my basement because I could barely walk at the time, but I went into like our little gym in my basement, and I grabbed a 5 pound dumbbell, and I just started
mm,
doing bicep curls. That's all I did. Did bicep curls for
mm-hmm.
like 15 minutes with a 5 pound dumbbell. You know what I did the next day? The same thing. And then I did the same thing. Then I started making a little progress. I started walking a little bit more, or I started to eat a little healthier. Well, within 2 months, I'd gained about 25 pounds. I had started to regain all my strength, regain my health back. And another piece of advice, you have to take little steps by little steps to reach an end goal. And I was nowhere near my end goal, but you have to go brick by brick to get to your ultimate goal. And that's what I've been doing. And,
I think
you
people
know,
reach too high sometimes and then they get overwhelmed, so they just quit. Yeah.
yeah. And it's great to have a massive dream, have the biggest dream in the world, but you need to have little goals in between. You can't just say, let's put, for example, I want to, become a multi-millionaire. I want to have, I want to help all these people. Okay, great. That's awesome. I want you to have that, but how are you going to get there?
Mm-hmm.
You need to have little steps. You need to be brick by brick every day, because you're going to, this is what people think. It's going to go like this. It's going to go roller coaster.
Right.
And,
Right.
so eventually I started gaining my strength back, all of these things. And I would say 5.5 months later, I'm now about 145 pounds. So I'm gaining about 30 to 35 pounds, doing good. I'm feeling healthy, still having troubles with some things for sure, not fully healthy. My wound still hasn't fully healed. So how my wound works is the skin has to naturally grow over it. So the skin is naturally growing to try and do it. So I'd have to continuously get my wound vac changed out until the skin eventually grew over it. The wound vac just got smaller and smaller and smaller. But I ended up going to my oncologist. And after my oncologist, I said, you know what? I'm going to go visit my ICU nurses, because I'm in the Cleveland Clinic at this point. Just go say hi to them.
Mm-hmm.
First person I see when I get into that ICU room was the nurse that saved my life when I went to cardiac arrest. We ended up crying. We ended up giving each other a hug. And he said, Matt, this is my last day in the ICU room. I'm getting shipped to another hospital tomorrow, and I wasn't even supposed to be working today. He said, I wasn't even supposed to be working today. I swear to God, my life, this is what he said. I wasn't even supposed to be working today. And I'm like, oh my God. So we got each other's number. We have each other on social media. We stay in touch like all the time. And
fantastic.
once again, people being brought into your life for a reason.
Absolutely.
So,
and it's great that when you can recognize that when it happens and you take note of it. A lot of people go through life and don't really notice those signs. Yeah.
Yep.
Good for you.
And thank you. And to make a long story, kind of wrap it up a little bit. Fast forward another 6 months later, my wound finally healed. So it almost took a full year for my skin to grow over. And the problem is now, which is kind of giving me a little limitations, is I don't have abdominals. So I can't do any ab work. It's hard for me to do certain like yoga poses, things like that, because using your core is essential. And I'm sure you know that doing yoga, it's essential. So for me, I have to be very limited on the things I can do, but I never let myself, say, I'm not going to give this a shot. I'm not going to at least try this, because I'm going to try it, unless I know it's going to hurt me. I'm not going to say, you know what? Oh, I'm not good enough to do this, or I can't do this. That's a limited belief. Don't give yourself limited beliefs. At least give it a shot and try.
The stories we tell ourselves. Yeah.
100%.
So, wow, you were quite the miracle.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, fast forward 2.5 years later, I'm now able to be a inspirational, motivational speaker. I'm a transformational coach. So it's more mind, body, spiritual, and impact. Now, when I say impact, that means I help people first discover themselves, first help them heal themselves, and then find their purpose in life, and then use that purpose to help other people. That's the impact, because you all have a story in life. We all have a story in life. And I want to help people use that to help other people, because maybe my story can't relate necessarily to somebody, but I guarantee your story can relate to somebody more than mine can. So that's just my journey right now. And, it's been a lot of healing. And that's it. So
the only question I have for you, so in order to heal yourself, does it bring you down to relive this every time you have to tell this story? Do you ever have moments where, oh my gosh, I have to relive that every time I tell it? Do you find that could be damaging to you mentally, or are there moments when you're like, I can't keep doing this because I have to tell it?
This is where I think a lot of people are so afraid to go relive a certain adversity and certain like trauma in their life, that when they end up going back to it, it creates so much stress and so much anxiety. And I fought it head on. I said, you know what? I'm fighting it in the moment, and I'm going to go back to it, because if I don't go back to it, I'm going to let it define me. I'm going to let it define me, because The only way you can let something not define you in life is going back and facing your fears, facing your challenges head on, and
Oh,
tackling them straight forward. You have to
nice.
get over them. And now you can, that's why I can use my story now. I love sharing my story because guess what? I have no emotional attachments to it.
That's
Think about
wonderful.
that. I don't have an
Yeah.
emotional attachment to it.
Yeah,
I have,
and that could be part of trauma healing too, that if you
mhm.
continue to relive it, but look at it differently, or maybe each time you do relive it, it gets easier to tell. Have you found that to be?
Absolutely. And you want to know the best part
Yeah.
is I find new ways to share it and I find new ways to help other people. For me now, it's not how am I going to share my story? It's how am I going to help impact other people that are
Mm,
going through this situation? How can I use my story to keep impacting other people? When I first started
mm.
off, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to share my story? What do I need to do? How am I going to say this? What am
Okay,
I going to do? And it
that
was like a
tells a story
script.
then. Mm,
When you share your story and you keep doing it, it's repetition. You get good at it.
mm-hmm,
Practice makes perfect. That's what we were
mm-hmm,
taught as a kid, and it's the truth. The more
mm-hmm.
you practice your yoga, you're an expert, I'm sure, at what you do. But you've done
No,
it
I'm not an
so many
expert.
times. I would consider you an expert. But the
We
more
all
you
think,
do it, yeah, the more you do
yeah,
it, the
the more
better
you
you
do it.
get.
Yes, yes, yes.
So for me,
Yeah,
the
I'm
more I
not
share
gonna,
my story, the less of an emotional attachment I get to the trauma, but the more emotional attachment I get to helping other people.
yeah,
So that's how I'm working towards my goal and my
I
way
like it.
of doing this. So yeah,
I like it. So no, I would say that none of us are experts. And I say the reason for that is because once you think you're an expert, then you stop learning and you stop
I
teaching
like
yourself.
that.
So there's always so much more to learn.
I
So I
love
have
that.
some more questions for you. So you were so young. Was that a common illness for someone your age? What were the doctors actually telling you about
Yep.
that?
Testicular cancer, very common for my age. 24, the testicular cancer is between 18 and 35, but remember back then I said I had all these back pains and stuff for months.
Hmm.
If I would have just gotten checked out, I can almost guarantee myself that I wouldn't have went through all these complications. Like the tumor, the weird part was with testicular cancer is usually the cancer forms in your testicle. That's where you see the symptoms. I had no symptoms in my testicle. So my cancer was extremely weird that it was in my small intestine.
Hmm.
And it's called I believe a yolk sac tumor. I don't want to get too into it because I'm not a doctor and I don't know
Hmm.
the medical terms, but all I do know is it's extremely rare. And the doctors from the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the top hospitals in the world,
Yes.
they even said they were going to make a case study out of me because they had never seen that type of
Wow.
cancer form in that type of way. So super weird and super abnormal. But
Hmm.
the testicular part, that was
Hmm.
that's very common in my age.
Yeah, so I have to wonder if the common one may not have led you to where you are right now, that it took you deeper into that
Yeah.
journey um, in order for you to transform and to
Yeah.
be who and what you are now. You're so inspiring. So if
Thank you.
I were going to leave the audience with a mantra, was there a mantra that you followed throughout this that kept you going through it and through it and through it? Was there anything specific that you would say to yourself over and over and over to help you along this healing path?
Yeah, I would say, I didn't have an exact thing, but my biggest thing was that, like I stated when I just started from cancers, how is this happening for me? What are the lessons I can learn from this? How am I going to become stronger through all of these setbacks? Because it wasn't just one setback and then, oh, good,
No.
you're fine. It was setback, then oh, hey, I'm starting to get some progress. Setback, hey, I'm starting to get some setback, and but how am I learning from this? How am I going to be a better version of myself coming
Mm,
out of this situation? So my best advice for anybody right now is how are you going to learn from your current struggles and situations right now? And how are you going to be a better version of yourself when you come out of this? And then the even more important part is how are you going to be able to help other people with it? Because I guarantee you somebody else is going through a somewhat similar situation as you
mm,
are. And they need to
yeah,
hear your
and
message
they
and
need
story
it.
as well.
Mm, they do. Thank you so much, Matt.
Well,
You
thank
are
you for
really
having me.
inspiring, and you do seem like
Well,
a miracle. So you'd be the best personal trainer ever because you can do the mind, you're in the body and the soul. And that's what yogis preach all the time. You've got to have that connection. And when you
yep.
do, it's endless. Your possibilities are endless. So what would you like to
Thank
close
you.
with? I
Um,
love the mantra you just gave us, and
yeah,
your
I love
message is
that
very
one, but
clear.
I think last thing I could say is you are enough. You are enough. And when I say you are enough, stop being so hard on yourself all the time. We get so caught up in other people's approval,
Mm,
or we get so caught up in comparison that we don't realize that we are enough, and that God has given us our special gifts to do what we want to do with our lives. We have a true purpose, but we have to go and work for it. And we
mhm.
have special gifts. Use your gifts. Just because somebody else might have a different set of gifts, don't compare yourself to that person,
Right,
because you
right.
are enough. So
Yeah, you do you. It may be overused, but it's good, and being authentic
love it.
to
Yeah, you got
yourself
to
and
just keep
got to
reiterating it.
come from
Yeah.
that space. Yes, and you absolutely are doing that. And kudos
Thank
to
you.
your to. I'm not going to get very personal, but I'm just wondering if there's a closer relationship going on there with, did you guys marry, or are you engaged, or are
Haven't got
you,
married yet or engaged. We're in the process, like, since this whole thing's been going on, we were
yeah, too
looking at
busy
rings
with, yeah.
together and stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
So
sweet.
we're definitely in the process, and oh my gosh, she has been incredible. We actually started a YouTube channel as well. So if
Oh,
anybody wants to check it out, it's called Mustaches for Matt YouTube channel. So
mm.
kind of on the whole tailor, but our channel, like the episodes that me and Lauren are doing, is called Dating After Diagnosis. So what we talk about is kind of our journey together. So it's not just my journey, it's her
Oh,
journey as
when you
well.
tell your story, it's hard to tell who that's going to inspire. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and we can include anything else you would like to add as far as how people can find you on social media, or
Yeah, I am mostly on Instagram. You can also see me on Facebook. Instagram is Matty, so Maddie_Odie. Don't ask why it's Maddie, but it's just Maddie_Odie. And then
it's a
you can just
pet
find
name.
me.
We know this already.
That's it. Yeah, that's what my mom used to call me, and I felt like
Oh,
might
oh
as well do it.
well,
So
let mom have it. Yeah.
yeah, right. And then it's just Matt Odie on Facebook. And if you are in more of a business setting and want to talk then, and if anybody's looking for a speaker, you can go on LinkedIn, and I'm Matt Odie on there as well. So
Oh, I love
I'm just
that.
giving as much value as I can, and I'd love to help anybody else out if they need anything. So
Well, thank you for reaching out to Geode. And we are Geode Yoga Plus Fitness, and you can find us at Geode, so it's Geode Dome in Facebook. And then on Instagram, we're geode.yoga.fitness. So search us
awesome.
out. We have a lot of online things going on, as well as mindful practices that can help people that are sitting in the shit, which is what we're calling it lately, and
That's
how
it.
you can become a better version of yourself on the other side of this. So totally inspiring. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Well,
It's
thanks
been
for having me,
awesome.
Marcy. I super appreciate it, and it was a pleasure being on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. Goodbye,
You're
everyone.
welcome.